for me? Yes, here we go. Okay, so there are different ways to entitle this coaching style issue. What we typically talk about, if you are a coach, is the autocratic coaching style or the democratic coaching style, etc. What we have in League of Legends, however, is typically very, very different. What we're looking at is a mix and match of different styles of casual or high-ranked players who come into League of Legends expecting to be coaches, but not actually having any formal training or education, or even having had a coach themselves, probably. A lot of the older League of Legends players that retires and adopt this whole coaching role, they haven't even had a coach or had more than one coach. So they might actually not be very familiar with it. We see the same in the amateur scene, right? We see the same in the lower elos, where people really, really want to help each other and really want to pick up different like helping other people with coaching. But what you end up doing is actually being an analyst for many people. And having an analyst who don't make any mistakes is great. It's amazing. And it's not a lesser job. Some people have this idea that being an analyst is like below the coach for some reason. But being an analyst isn't a lesser job or a worse job. It's a different job. It's a different title, right? But it's very important that we have a clear idea of what's the job of one guy and what's the job of the other guy. Simply because if we don't have that, then two different styles, two different people will clash and we'll end up with lacking work ethic, right? It also means that if somebody comes to you with a coaching related issue and you present to them the methodology of an analyst, you'll end up with a guy who actually haven't received the kind of coaching he might have been looking for, or even the kind of coaching he didn't know he was looking for or needed, right? I'm going to do a little breakdown here on two different classic coaching roles in the League of Legends and why, like, what their pros and cons are. So we have the play-by-play coach. I'm assuming everybody here or most of you know who Last Shadow is, or LS. Yeah, exactly. He's the guy who does videos on YouTube, like 1.5 hour videos, and just breaks down every little single thing in a replay, right? The play-by-play coaching makes up around 80 to 90% of amateur coaching. You tell the student, get me a replay. Then you sit down with the student and then you just go over the replay and you address every single little mistake that's made wrong in that game. Now, the play-by-play coaching has some really, really strong suits, but it is not at all efficient in terms of actually learning things. And we'll get into the details of why that is later. In fact, most of my seminar here is based around the idea that I want to pick apart this play-by-play coaching style and present an alternative to you guys. The pros of the play-by-play coaching is, of course, that it's actually really, really efficient if you have a student just one time. Like, if you just have one student and he's already relatively good, right? I wouldn't call it time efficient, but if you have 1 hour and nothing else, nothing more than that, then I guess it can be used, right? The classic, so to speak, use for the play-by-play is when you have a high-ranked team that's in a tournament of some sort. This is because a team will play differently in a tournament setting compared to a standard like practice environment. Like, just because the human condition, we behave differently under pressure compared to when we are like in a practice environment, right? So it's very, very good to squeeze out every little drop of information we can get from a casual setting and then go over and just really like break down in the finest little details all the information we can get from tournaments and competitions. Just because, well, we don't do tournaments and competitions as much as we do normal practice. And it's not something you can, like, schedule, right? It's not a controlled environment. You can never control what your enemies are going to be doing in a tournament or the opposition, right? So if you do have a team or a player that participates in a tournament, please, by God, do the play-by-play with them and just try to get as much out of that replay or that game or those games as you can. Because that's I would say, the only relevant applicable structure in which you should be using the play-by-play. The issue with being a play-by-play coach can be said to be that, well, if we have the play-by-play, you appeal very, very much to the minds of other people, the person you're coaching, but you don't appeal to their actual person, right? You don't appeal to the heart. You don't appeal to their body. I can show you guys a video slowed down 100 times with little flashing arrows pointing to all the different key presses of how insect does the insect move, the Q, word hop, kick, right? But that doesn't mean that you can just hop into a game and do it straight away. The insect requires mechanical practice, right? It requires in-depth training. I can show you the replay 100 times. You will still not be able to execute it on the first try, unless you can already do it, of course. So while the play-by-play is really, really good at squeezing out little drops of information from things, it doesn't present the best way to approach a learning situation simply because, well, it's so focused on teaching the head that it forgets teaching the rest of the body. And I'll present alternatives later. The other faulty coaching method that's actually emerging since I launched the seminar feature even, is the breakdown, which is, kind of like what we're doing right now. You sit down and you think, okay, my guy, he really needs to learn how to lane swap. So you pull up like all of the videos that people have ever done of lane swapping, and then you take notes and find the common factors, and then you like begin to write little notes and make little hot link videos and draw in RiftKit all the different ways to lane swap. And then you sit your guys down for 2 hours and you just explain to them every single little bit of information that could ever possibly in any situation be relevant to the lane swap, right? And you teach them, by God, like a classroom, right? You teach them every single little aspect of the lane swap. And the breakdown, this seminar, this lecture structure is amazing, right? It's so cool if you have guys who can follow through with it. I don't encourage this as a method of teaching consistently because of the fact that it's boring as all flying fricks, right? It's so boring. It's if you have ever sat down in class and spaced out after 5 minutes, some of you might even have spaced out already. I know people will do that in this seminar. But if you ever sat down and just like spaced out, you know what I'm talking about, right? People will never pick up all the information and people will forget it, right? And it carries the same problem as the play-by-play coaching. It teaches you very, very little about how to actually follow through mechanically unless you structure the lesson and pepper it with exercises throughout. But that's really, really difficult to do for beginners. We'll actually get into how to create these exercises later as well. I hope you guys can see what I mean when I like this. These are like the two most common coaching methods, and they're maybe, I would say they consist of 95% of all coaching I've seen in the League of Legends scene. If you compare this to real sports, right, you don't just show up for a football match and then play soccer for like 90 minutes, right, and then go home. You show up and then you dribble cones, and then you maybe shoot only at the goal. Maybe you try different passes, right? You break it down into different, more efficiently structured learning techniques instead of just going through the match you played last week and just analyzing every little bit of it. So if you are a coach who is capable of stepping away from these two, not completely ignoring these two, but stepping away from them to a large extent, you'll have such a leg up. I don't want to say on your competition because this is not a tournament for you. But you'll have such a leg up in terms of helping the people you are trying to coach to maximum efficiency. There's an addendum here, which is when you reach the higher, the uppest of echelons in coaching, like LCS Challenger scene. But I won't go over that until the advanced seminar, simply because of the fact that I'm assuming none of you guys do coach LCS. Please speak up if you do. But I don't recall anybody here coaching like Challenger scene or LCS. Oh, okay. So I don't feel like it's that relevant to go into that right now. Let's go into a bit about how to structure your coaching, how to structure your teaching. This is a method that I created. It's also the most pixelated image you'll find on the internet because I'm not very good with images. If you can't read it, it says break theory, practical, and optimization from blue, red, green to purple. Okay. This model here shows a rough estimate of how you should be allotting time in any given teachings or any given teaching setting. The model scales, but to a point, meaning the model scales up to around 6 to 8 hours, and beyond that, it kind of falters. So, for example, if you have a boot camp with your players where they play 12 hours a day, which is, by the way, I don't encourage because it's unhealthy as frick. But if you do have that kind of boot camp or something, you should probably mix and match this model a little bit so it fits better, right? So it fits more efficiently into how to, like, in essence, what I'm saying is you put more time into the break section, less time into the theory, and perhaps see if you can squeeze a little bit more into optimization, right? So take a little bit about from theory and practical to optimization and break, essentially. As you can see here, 50% of the time in this model, the majority portion, is allotted to practical. Now, practical is exercises. It's different ways that we can work with our bodies and with our fingers, our eyes, our ears, and quote-unquote experiment with the things we're trying to learn. What that does for us, what that gives us, is it gives us a way to remember all these things we're trying to learn and trying to improve, and really implement it as we learn it, right? If I teach you guys some math right now and then ask you in a year to go over it again, you'll have a higher chance of being able to do it if you actually sat down and solved some math problems using the theories I just gave you, compared to if I just told you about how to solve this math and then send you on your way. And then in a year, half a year, I call on you and say, hey, do you remember that one time, that like a half a year ago when I taught you some math? Please do that right now, right? Your brain, you haven't been allowed to play with it and work with it, so your brain doesn't consider it important, right? This is also why if you go on like a subreddit, like the Summoner School subreddit, you'll find a ton of people who like have all these, there's, for every day, there's maybe 100 posts with like, help me, I cannot play Vayne. And then you get the same little bits of information, but there's never anything that really seems to help these people, or oftentimes don't seem to help these people, because while the feedback that's given to people is correct, and largely correct at least, what you're presented with is, it's not in a way that it allows you to physically practice it, right? For example, if a guy shows up on the Summoner Reddit and says, the Summoner School subreddit, and says, I don't know how to flash skill shots. Well, if you hop into a game, you might even have like 3 or 4 different tries of that per game, per half hour, per hour, to try and do that, to try and improve that faction, which is super, super inefficient for you. It's also why people are hailing the sandbox mode so much for coaching, because it allows us to put more effort into the practical section. 20-hour rule, right? Something like that. Yeah. It's in that ballpark, Luke. I have more on the 20-hour rule in like my second seminar actually. But if you notice, I'm just gonna continue. If you notice the practical bit here, the green bit, the 50% of what we're doing as coaches, that's missing in both the play-by-play and the breakdown, which is why both methods are so inefficient, right? Getting these 50% in is 101. It's the first and foremost step to becoming a good coach. Without that, without any practical learning, I would call you an analyst. I wouldn't call you a coach, because that's the difference between a coach and an analyst. Theory, the 30% here that I've allotted to theory, this is where you explain and talk about different concepts to your players. This doesn't have to be a lecture or a classroom style talk. It can be a discussion with your player or players where you work out the different things or facets that might be prudent or pertaining to your player, right? It's also usually the portion you allot to experimentation, right? So if you know that a player has slow reaction time, but you don't know if it's because he's over encumbered by visual clutter on the screen, or if it's because he cannot hear the skill shots coming, or if it's because he's just like gets stressed out. In the theory section, you'd put him through different kinds of exercises to pick up on these little details, to figure out, is he losing track of his character in a team fight because he can't find it through because of visual clutter? Well, then we turn down shadows and animations, right? Or is he losing himself because there's too many sounds and he just gets confused and can't hear when he actually flashes and thought he flashed but he didn't? Well, then you turn down animation noise, right? Etc., etc. This is like all the finding out bits goes into theory. The blue segment here, the break, it says like it's self-explanatory. If I should give you 3 good tips for climbing ELO, this is like, 3 good tips for climbing ELO. Find out more how. Yeah, we all seen them. But if I should give you 3 good tips for climbing ELO, it'd be drink lots of water, get 7.5 hours of sleep every night, and take 10 minutes of break for every hour of League of Legends you play. That's the 3 tips. It'll help you so much. Studies over and over and over and over again show us that the more of a healthy lifestyle you have, the more of a positive impact it has on your ability to learn and retain information. The quicker, by the way, the more breaks you take and the more healthy you live, the quicker your body will also be able to pick up on muscle memory. A recent study from the American military, or what's it called, the Navy, the guys who fly planes. It's called the Air Force. Yeah, Air Force, right?
Yeah.
Pardon. So the Air Force did a study recently that showed that, for example, people who smoke cigarettes have 10% slower reactions in general. People who get 1 hour of sleep have around 15 to 20% slower reactions compared to the people who sleep the recommended amount. People who are chronically malnutritioned also have slower reactions and have a harder time picking up and retaining information and picking out smaller details, right? So these breaks, they look like the kind of portion that you would cut out when you're tryharding, but actually they're the portion you would enforce the most when you're tryharding. And a lot of good coaches, even some of the best coaches in the world, forget about this. Especially if you go to Asia, the Korean coaches will just straight up ignore breaks and play like 6 hours in a row, and that kills players. Also, yeah, by the way, it prolongs your career or your playing lifespan significantly. If you play more than 1 game per day, you are in significant health risks right there. Considering your wrists, your neck, your shoulders, your elbows, your back, all of this, it's not healthy to sit down and play a computer game for so long. So as soon as you click into the second game, you are beginning a slow but consistent journey towards self-destruction. So enforce these breaks, whether it be for your own gameplay or for people you are coaching. This is very important. So you've taken 10 minutes of breaks. You've explained to the guy you're coaching the different theories about what you're learning. And then you've designed a couple of cool exercises to teach it. So what's the last 10%, this optimization, the purple bit here? Well, optimization is the bit where you adjust common knowledge to the individual or the people you are coaching. Say you have a guy who you're teaching how to farm, right? Or how to kite. Let's say kiting, right? So you're teaching him how to kite. And then halfway through kiting, you figure out this guy can't do it very effectively. And you figure out it's because, well, this guy has, say, a hand injury that prevents him from moving his mouse as quickly as he needs to do it effectively. Well, figuring out a solution to that, or figuring out a workaround, or even rerouting what you're teaching and working on, that's what goes on in the optimization bit. Every single player will have different single circumstances. You can coach every single person in the entire world, all 8 billion or something, and all of them, like, no 2 people will be alike. There'll be similarities for sure, but no 2 people will be alike. And it's up to the coach to be flexible enough to allot time to figure out how can we make sure that my teachings is not just universal, but individual as well. How can we make our teachings from being something that, you just mass produce and send different student after different student through, and put it down on a level where you can adapt your teachings and your coaching to each individual student, right? I hope this all makes sense to you guys. I'm going to take some coffee. Damn, there's some nasty coffee. Nice. This is not... Okay, so this model, is like the one I want you to print out right now. Like just if you don't have a printer, run to the nearest store right now and print this out. Just screen cap it and pull it on your wall or get it tattooed on the inside of your eyelids. This is like the thing, right? This is, if you open any kind of teaching textbook, or any kind of coaching textbook, or any kind of psychology textbook, probably even, you'll find this printed on maybe like page 7, right? It's one of the basic building blocks of how to be a teacher, how to be a coach. And this is not the actual, yes, this entire thing will be available, as well as the video. This is not the name of it, by the way, the chain of learning. I learned this on a seminar on teaching I got pulled through when I was younger, and it's been so long that I forgot the name of it. So I just gave it a name that sounded relevant, and then I just slapped it on here. So I call it the chain of learning. You'll find it under another name somewhere else, but the steps are the same and the theories are the same. Whenever you approach teaching somebody something, it's very, very important that you can figure out where on this chain is the actual problem, okay? There are 4 steps to the chain, and figuring out not only where should you be working, but also, how to progress and when to progress through the chain is a huge part of how to do coaching. If you're doing self-coaching or self-analysis, the chain can also apply here because it's the same concept, right? The only issue is that step number 1 actually becomes significantly harder for yourself because having a self-realization typically takes some sort of crisis, and having a crisis is not something that you can just like provoke, right? Or you can, but it's not funny, and then it's itchy to work with. So having step 1 covered by a different person, a coach, typically, is actually like the number 1 reason, or one of the main reasons we have coaches, because we have somebody else to do the realization for us, right? And whether or not the coach then can convince you or you can convince your students to realize the same thing, that's a challenge. But that's something you'll have to deal with on your own. It works the way of you look at a person or student's gameplay typically, and then you figure out where on the chain does he have the issue. The further down you can begin on the chain, the less dramatic the issue is, or the less defined or noticeable the issue is. So for example, if you figure out that, I'll explain the steps later, but if you figure out that you can work with the guy on the repetition bit, well then that means that he's already pretty well covered on that step. So the further up the chain you can move, the more likely it is to be one of his actual main flaws. If that makes sense to you guys. If you can only work in the optimization bit, competition should also be called competition/optimization. If you can only work in that bit, then it's likely to not be his main flaw, because that means he actually has it covered pretty well. Okay? Realization is the step of any single topic where the person you're trying to teach has to understand every little facet of what you're trying to teach them, right? It's just super simple. So, say you have a guy who he messages you and says, "Please coach me, LOL." And you say, "Okay," and you look at this game. Yeah, this happens. And you say, "Okay," and you look at his replay and you figure out, he's down around 60% in CS compared to an LCS player. And you say, "Okay, so his CS is horrendous, right?" And you figure out, well, does he know this, right? And you say, "Hey, so what do you feel about your CSing this game? Was that okay?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I feel like I CS'd way better than I usually did," right? Well, then he already lacks in the realization department. He simply does not understand not only what is his problem, but what are the different facets of his problems? What are all the niche cases of his problems? So, you should have better CS, except when you're playing Fist, you can allow up to a 50% drop in CS because of the roaming that you might be doing, and also being zoned from level 1 to level 4, etc., right? So, step 1 of teaching a topic is making sure and covering that your student understands what is his actual problem. And this can take a while. You can spend a lot of time working on making the guy understand that, yes, he might be playing Fizz, but it doesn't make sense to have 89 CS at 30 minutes, right? It's just harder sometimes. It's because of various reasons. Question? No. The second bit is analysis, right? So you figure out, okay, so this guy has an issue understanding and realizing what his issue is. So you explain it to him, I can see already just by glimpse that you have an issue CSing. In the analysis segment, you will work out and present all the different facets of the issue, right? So you will not only have to be able to say, what should be better, but to which degree should it be better? So you say, okay, so his CSing is bad. Then you pull up some replays of him, of professional players, maybe playing that champion and saying, so they average this CS, so that's what we're shooting for, right? This is to define not only what, give you and the student an idea of what are the goals we're working towards. It feels useless to work towards something without an end goal. And even if you don't have a defined end goal, it's very important that you understand all the facets of what you're working on, right? In the analysis segment, you also do all the different scouting that you have to on the guy. So you have to find out all the little bits that goes into this optimization bit. We'll use it later, but it's important to be aware of it already now. It's where you get to design your little exercises. So if he's bad at CSing, you might put him into a custom game and have him CS under no pressure. And then you might hop in yourself and try to shoot him every time he shoots his minion. And then you add a little bit of pressure and so on and so forth. But this is the bit where you have to cover for your own sake and for the student's sake all the analysis that is needed to learn this topic, right? So now the player understands the scope of what he's needing to work on. Now he understands what are all the different things he has to go through in order to get there, and what are the different steps, what are the individual aspects of what we're working on. Now comes the 50% bit down here, the practical bit, the green bit. Repetition. Was it Bruce Lee who said, "I fear not the man who has practiced 5,000 kicks, but I fear the man who has practiced a kick 5,000 times"? I think that was Bruce Lee. What this means is the brain has this neat little filter. If you go outside right now and walk down your street and then come up and then try to describe every single person you saw on the street, you would be able to describe at most 1 to 3 people, assuming it's a populated street, right? And you'll typically only describe the most attractive people you saw. Similarly, if I ask you to close your eyes right now and describe the color of your living room, or your friend's living room, you won't remember, not specifically or completely. Your brain has this filter that filters out irrelevant information from relevant information. If you don't have this filter, that's a disease, or rather a mental illness, which is something you should contact a psychologist for, probably. But most of us, we have this, right? The issue with this is that unless you repeat an action or a phrase or a sentence or whatever, unless you have this repetition segment, your brain will be tricked into thinking that what you just learned is irrelevant, right? What you just learned isn't relevant enough to become part of your hardwired data, right? What that means is, for example, I can teach you how to do the Lee Sin insect. If you hop into a custom game, execute the insect once, and then never play Lee Sin for 3 months, you will not be able to execute it again. Simply because your brain did not ever hardwire this into your system. It didn't become part of your muscle memory because you didn't repeat it. If we scroll back again, notice what else is missing in the play-by-play. Repetition. You don't repeat shit in the play-by-play. It's just not in the structure, right? So repetition is the bit that you'll be focused on the most. And it's boring if you don't make it interesting. But it's very important that you understand that we have to work out this fix for how, the human condition. We have to work out how this works, right? Competition is the last step. Competition can also be called optimization, but it's called competition because as you are approached by a student or as you are presented with a coaching position, you'll typically be encapsulated in some sort of time restraint of some description. Typically, the student will have their own goals in mind coming to you as a student. They'll say stuff like, I want to be gold by the end of the season for the rewards, right? Or maybe I want to be diamond by the end of the month so I can play with my friends in a tournament, etc., etc. If you don't have that kind of restriction, you might need to like if the guy just says I want to be better, there's still gonna be some natural, shall we call it, like not restrictions but boundaries on like different times when you have to optimize and change out on the thing you're working on. For example, a patch change might be coming up and it invalidates completely everything we just worked on, right? Competition is the bit where you have made the player understand every little facet of the issue. You've analyzed all the things and figured out how do we fix it. You have put the guy through endless repetitions, and now you say, okay, we're looking at the outcome of our repetition. How do we optimize it? How do we make it perfect, right? It typically stems from the time when you stop experimenting with a professional, say, soccer team, and you say, okay, we have a tournament coming up in a month. In that tournament, we'll be using these 3 strategies, and then you perfect them, right? Instead of beginning to learn new things, you understand that you are constricted by time, and we have to acknowledge that we have to optimize it, right? Make it as good as possible. So is anybody still lacking in the chain of learning? It's a little, it can be tricky to understand, but I feel like it makes good sense once you like put it into practice, which we'll be doing now.